I never really planned to share this story, or this photo for a matter of fact. But with everything going on in the world right now, with George Floyd's death and all these protests against racism, I felt like I had to share this experience. My name is Sylvio. I do street photography and music, and this series is called Shutter Thoughts, where I reflect on some of my past photos and what I learned from shooting them. This story took place last year on a work trip to Oslo, Norway, where I spent 3 days working on a project with my colleagues and local creators. After 3 days of hard work, catching up with friends, and even a bit of partying, I woke up early in the morning to catch my flight back to Stockholm, Sweden, where I live. I'm heading to the train station, minding my own business, when a man approaches me. So this guy stops me, he had a very curious look in his face, and he says something in Norwegian. So then I asked him, I was like, hey, sorry, I don't speak Norwegian. And then he's like, oh, English, okay. And then he asked me, he's like, oh, where are you going? Because he saw I had the suitcase, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to the airport. And then he was like, oh, the airport? Where are you going? And I was like, I'm going to Stockholm. And he's like, oh, Stockholm? Then why don't you speak Swedish? And then I was like, I do speak Swedish. I just rather speak English when I'm in Norway because I don't want to misunderstand anything. And then he was like, but then what are you doing here? And then I was like, I'm here for work. And then he was just super surprised. He's like, work? Huh? It's almost like, oh wow, you have a job. And I was thinking why is this guy so surprised?
Surprise, mother.
And then he was like, well, how about education? Education is very important. And I was like, yeah, I graduated from university 4 years ago, so I probably would know. And then I was thinking in my head, damn, homie, you're hitting me with a lot of prejudice right now. You're so surprised I have a job, and then assuming that I don't have an education. And then just the look on his face was was almost the only thing I can compare to is kind of like that Jackie Chan meme. But I have to say, this whole time, he had this very friendly, curious manner to him. So I wasn't uncomfortable at all. I'll admit, the title was a bit clickbaity because I wouldn't necessarily call this guy a racist, but clearly this guy had prejudice towards me. And I'm not gonna just jump into conclusions and say it's because of the color of my skin, but it was probably because I looked different. And most likely he had some kind of prejudice against, people who look like me, where he thought that, I was first someone who didn't bother to learn the language and then didn't have an education or was surprised they even had a job. So once I told him about myself, then he was sort of in a kind of happy mood and wanted to tell about himself. He was like, yeah, I'm an immigrant too. I'm from Serbia, former Yugoslavia, do you know? And I was like, yeah, I know. I'm pretty good at geography, by the way. So I had my camera on my neck, as I almost always do when I'm traveling. And then he looked at the camera and he's like, oh, so you're a photographer? And I was like, yeah, it's something I like doing. Can I take your photo? And he was like, yeah, okay, what for? And then I was like, well, I just like taking photos of people I come across. It's I do street photography and I travel a lot and I meet a lot of people. So he was like, yeah, okay. And then at that point, I just thanked him and then I went on my way. So on the train to the airport, I had a chance to reflect about what the hell just happened. And I was thinking man, this guy just came up to me with all these prejudiced thoughts. But we ended up walking away feeling like we had a great conversation. My hope is that he left that conversation with a new positive outlook, and the next time he met someone looking like me, he may not jump to those sort of conclusions again. And so the first thing I did was actually write what had happened to my best friends and then sent it to them. Fast forward to today, with George Floyd's death and all the protesting going on, people are fed up with racism and are protesting against an unjust system that is not only in the US, but it's around the world. I totally support protesting, and I think it's important that people stand up for what they believe in. But what got me thinking was that, so we're doing these anti-racism protests, but it's not like a racist is just gonna magically one day wake up like the next day and be like, you know what? A lot of people don't like that I'm racist. I'm just gonna stop being racist. Like, that doesn't happen, because racism is built on prejudice. Because the thing is, there's reasons why a person feels the way they feel, whether or not it's reasonable or not. The only way for a person to stop thinking a certain way is to be able to see another perspective, something that eventually makes more sense. And one really good way of achieving this is through conversation and exchanging thoughts. This is why I think it's really important for people of privilege to have these conversations. Now, when I say privilege, I don't just mean white people. If you're in the position to even be having a reasonable conversation with a racist, you're somewhat privileged yourself. And that includes like myself. I know that I'm a quite socially outgoing person, and I'm able to connect with all sorts of different people. And that in itself makes me privileged. I think it's a responsibility for people who have the privilege to speak up and educate, have conversations with this person. I don't want to make this a super long video or a super long political discussion, but I am just sharing my experience, and I hope it draws some inspiration to you guys and girls out there. As photographers or any sort of creator, artist, you have the power to create and spread a message with your work, and I just hope that, you take the opportunity to do so. If you've enjoyed this series, let me know, and hopefully I'll continue to add to it, because I have a bunch of photos that have pretty fun, interesting stories behind them. And in the meantime, stay tuned for more travel, street photography, and music adventures. Peace.